welcome to week 20 of our journey through the Word. This week we'll continue in Psalm 119, and we had learned last week that Psalm 119 follows the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet with 8 verses given to each letter. One of the things I mentioned last week that I'd like to make a little clearer this week is that in Paleo Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, they didn't use the letters that we know today as the Hebrew letters. What they used was pictures, and each picture made a letter, and it was the pictures that formed the words. Let me give you an example. As we look at the picture for the letter Aleph, the very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, we see that the picture is that of an ox head. And so the ox head represents the one who is the head of something. He is chief. And as we look at the next letter, which is Bet, the word Bet means house. And so we see a pattern. The picture is supposed to be of a pattern of being in a house. And so when we put these two words together, the picture of the ox head and the picture of the house and their meanings, we have one who is the head of something. What is he the head of? He is the head of the house. And so when we look at the two letters, Aleph, Bet, it forms a word. The word is Av, and that word means father. Why father? Because father is the head of the house. And so that's why these letters are actually pictures of something. And in putting the pictures together, it will form what the word is trying to say. I'm attaching a chart, and it'll be in the description box below. And on this chart, it's not a comprehensive chart, but it's a very good overview of each of the letters of Hebrew and the pictures that they were in Paleo Hebrew and ancient Hebrew. And it will also give what those pictures meant. Now, there are other meanings also to some of these letters, but this, as I said, this will give you a good overview. This week, we begin our journey with the letter Chet. And the letter Chet, if you look at the picture, you'll see that it's a picture of a fence. And so this letter will talk about things that are like an inner room or a portion that's fenced off. So it shouldn't surprise us as we look at the very beginning of these 8 letters, and we find that it says, the Lord or Yahweh is my portion. Yahweh is that fenced off area where I can live. And so we continue and we see that Tet, the picture is a snake, or it means to surround something. If you'll notice as you're going through these 8 verses, notice how many times there is the repetition. You're going to come to a phrase that seems to be repeated over and over. You are good, you do good. And so we see that we are surrounded with the goodness of God. Come to the letter Yod, and the Yod means hand, and the hand signifies our work or our deeds. It can also signify a memorial. And at the very beginning of these 8 verses, you hear those words, your hands have fashioned me. Your hands have made and fashioned me. In the next letter, you see Kaf. And this is also the hand, but now it's the open palm. And so it means to cover, to shade, or to open, or to allow. And we see in these verses that it's filled with the need of God's covering in our lives. Lamed it means a cattle goad, how you would keep sheep and going in the right direction and goad them on. And so it came to mean to have control over or to have authority. It also means the tongue, because we often control by our tongue. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us when we see that these 8 verses start off with, forever your word is settled in heaven. Forever your word has the authority in our life, and it's the word of that which is spoken of the tongue. Mem Mem means water, and it can mean signifying a life-giving flow, a life-giving force. It can mean blood. It also can mean chaos because of the chaos that was brought as a result of the flood. And so once again, we see in these verses the constant life-giving flow throughout these verses. Nun means fish, and it shows activity, life. We see that in verse 107, keep me alive. Samech, prop. It means to prop something up. And so therefore it's significant of that which supports or assists, or it can also mean to twist slowly or to turn. We find in Psalm 119 verse 116, sustain me or support me. Also in verse 117, uphold me, support me, assist me. These are just a few of the illustrations of the letters and how they affect what's written. And notice that when you come to the last letter, Tav, that the last letter, Tav, has a different feel than the other letters. And no longer are we dealing with the enemy and those who hurt us or wound us. But in these 8 verses, it's all about self and dealing with myself. As we come to the end of Psalm 119, we're ushered into Psalm 120 through 134. These 15 Psalms are extremely significant because these are what's called the Psalms of Ascents. I want you to notice that it's not the Psalm of Ascent, it's the Psalms of Ascents, going up. Ascending to what? Well, if we look at these 15 Psalms and how they are used, we'll see how important they are. Again, they're 15 Psalms. If we look at the numeric value, because in Hebrew, every letter has a numeric value with it, as well as a word significance. And if we look at the numeric value of the name Yah, we know that the 4-letter name for God is Yahweh or Yahuwah. The 2-letter name for Yah is Yud He. And if we look at the numeric value is 15. So we have 15 Psalms. We have 15 as the numeric value of Yah. Also, is it any coincidence that there are 15 words? If we were reading the priestly blessing in Hebrew, we would find that there are 15 words that make up the priestly blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. We're all very familiar with those words now that it has become a song that everyone is singing. But the priestly blessing, God had said to Moses, you have your priests speak these words over, and by these words they will invoke my name on the people. And so the Levites would sing these 15 Psalms, and they would do it on 15 steps. As you would go into the temple, there were 15 steps that took you from the woman's courtyard up into the courtyard of the Israelites. And so the Levites would stand on these 15 steps, and they would recite these 15 Psalms. These 15 Psalms were also the songs that were sung by the pilgrims as they would ascend up to Jerusalem. You may remember that 3 times a year, God had ordered that they were to present themselves before Yahweh in Jerusalem. And so they would come at these 3 festivals. You may remember what they are. They are Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you've ever noticed when it talks about going to Jerusalem, they say, let us go up to Jerusalem. Doesn't matter what direction that they're coming from. If they're coming from the north, they will go up to Jerusalem. If they're coming from the south, they will go up to Jerusalem. You see, because no matter which direction you come from, if you are going up to Mount Zion, up to to Jerusalem, you will have to ascend because it's on a mountain. It's a small mountain in comparison to the Rockies or to the Appalachian Mountains, but none the same. It is a mountain called Mount Zion. And so as the pilgrims would come, as they would begin to near the mountain that would take them up to Mount Zion, they would begin to sing these 15 psalms. These 15 psalms were also sung during the Feast of Tabernacle, specifically during the ceremony of the rejoicing of the water drawing. You see, each day the priests would make their way down Mount Zion and they would go to the pool of Siloam. They would draw water out of the pool of Siloam and then they would make their way back up Mount Zion. And when they would get to the temple, which would be at the top, they would take the water, and at the same time, when they were going to be pouring out the libation, the wine for the sacrifice, they would also at that time pour out water as well. And so as they were making their way back up with the water to pour it out, they would sing these 15 psalms as they would ascend up to the temple, which would be at the top of Mount Zion. There's a progression in these chapters that sometimes when you read it, you'll just read through the chapters and perhaps may even miss the progression. You see, in chapter 120, which is the beginning of the ascent, you'll notice that this chapter, Psalm 120 speaks of where we have come from and where we are taken from. Psalm 121, 6 times we will hear the word shemer. Shemer means to protect, to guard, to keep watch. And we will hear the promise of God and his promise of protection and his care, which urges us to climb higher. Then in Psalm 122, we see the destination of where we are going. We are going to Jerusalem. That's really important in the broad picture, in the big picture, because as we get to the end of Revelation and the end of all time, we will find that Jerusalem is the destination. We'll learn more about that when we get to the book of Revelation. In Psalm 123, we find that it is a time of soul searching, looking deep into ourselves. And then in Psalm 124, I believe as a result of the soul searching, we recognize God's faithfulness while we recognize our unworthiness. And in Psalm 125, now we see God's inner workings in us. And in Psalm 126, we see the result of God's inner workings in us. Psalm 127, we recognize the sovereignty of God and the blessings of God. In Psalm 128, we once again see blessings and fruitfulness to those who fear Yahweh. And in Psalm 129, now we see God's judgment on those who don't fear Yahweh and who hate us because of our love for God. In Psalm 130, we see the hope of God's redemption. And in Psalm 131, we continue to hear those words of hope. In Psalm 132, we hear the promise of Messiah and the promise of the millennial reign, the Messiah's reign in Zion. In Psalm 133, what a beautiful psalm of the unity of spirit that comes when we all come into unity of God's spirit and of God's working in us. And then in Psalm 134, now we hear how that we are all called to be priests to our God. And so we finish the Psalms of Ascent, and we see that God's ultimate goal is to have us to come into his presence as priests to our God. In Psalm 136, now we hear the Great Hallel. In the Great Hallel, there are 26 verses. 26 times you're going to hear this phrase, for his loving kindness is everlasting. We find that there's 26 generations from Adam to the giving of Torah. God is faithful. His loving kindness is everlasting. And as we look at, once again, the numeric value, this time of the word Yahweh, not just Yah, as we saw in the one before, but this is Yahweh. What is the numeric value of Yahweh? It's 26, for his loving kindness is everlasting. We find that this great Hallel is quoted every Sabbath in every synagogue. And so that brings us to Psalm 138. In Psalm 138, we hear some words that are, again, very familiar to us. And it says, I will bow down toward your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your loving kindness and your truth, for you have magnified your word according to your name. You notice in this psalm, it says that I will bow down. And this word is one we've looked at before. It means to totally prostrate myself toward your holy temple. And I will prostrate myself toward your holy temple because of your loving kindness and because of your truth. The word for loving kindness is chesed. Chesed is a very difficult word for translators to translate. And as you look in different translations, you'll find that it's translated numerous ways, because this word takes in shades of meanings that we don't have one word that will encompass them all. And so you'll find that the translators will often use a different shade of meaning, because it can mean kindness, it can mean mercy, compassion, it can mean love, it can mean friendship. And we will also find that this word is often linked to a covenant relationship, which is born out of love. And so we see that the psalmist says, I bow down to your chesed, your kindness, your mercy, your compassion, your love, your friendship, your faithfulness to a relationship that's born out of a covenant relationship, out of your love. We also find that he says, I bow down to your truth. The word truth here means your firmness, your faithfulness, your truth, that which is stable. I can build on it because it is stable, it is fact, it is firm, it is truth. And so the basic idea of the word emet, which is truth, means firmness or certainty. And so we find that the psalmist speaks of God's word, his promises. He says, your word is made great because of the character that it's based on, the character which is kindness, mercy, love, compassion, and faithfulness. We will end our week with Psalm 139. In this psalm, we see how intimately acquainted God is with each of us. He knows our every thought. He knows our every molecule, how we were made. He knows us inside and out. I pray as we come to the end of this week that we too will pray those words. God, I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and this my soul knows very well. God bless you. See you again next week.